Hello, everyone. Today, I am very excited to present Dr. Bryan Wilson. Dr. Bryan Wilson is a PhD and an MBA, nationally recognized and award-winning scientific leader. He has 14 years of scientific expertise, leadership, education, and communication skills. It has helped him develop visionary and performance-driven healthcare and biomedical science teams and talent. He is intentionally dedicated to embracing change, championing optimism, and supporting teams with a spirit of excellence and vigor. I also have to add, Dr. Wilson and I were actually postdocs in the same lab at the UNC McAllister Heart Institute a couple of years ago. So I'm very excited today to have him. He is currently working as a senior consultant, a clinical science at Halloran Consulting Group. So welcome, Dr. Bryan Wilson.
Hey, Roberto, thanks so much for having me. How are things going?
I'm doing very well. It's really nice to see you. I mean, I've been expanding on the background that we have before because we're part of the same lab, part of the same people working at the University of North Carolina as we were postdocs back then, and we each have chosen different paths. I know that I'm still in academia, but you went in a different direction that is incredibly exciting, and that's why we want to showcase it today. So I had a first question for you, and hopefully you'll be able to share with us a lot of your background and expertise, all of your experience, and have a great time. So the first one is, so I wanted to ask you about, you have multiple initiatives from your CV. I can see that you have many different scientific, community, and activities that engage different audiences. So can you talk to us about a little bit about one of those, or the one that you're most proud of? I found in your CV that you were the president and co-founder of Educated on Purpose, that was founded in New Orleans, Louisiana. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure, Roberto. So as you can see from my CV, there are a couple of things about me that become apparent. And one that is secret is that I'm a busybody, so I can't keep still. So I'm always doing something or getting involved in some activity. But all of the activities that I've been involved with over the years have been very intentional. So what I like to do is when an opportunity is presented to me, I like to think about what I can give to that opportunity. But I also like to think about what can that opportunity give to me. And it's really rooted in a symbiotic nature of how you go about being of service, how you go about taking advantage of new opportunities. And so for me, the example you mentioned, Educated on Purpose, this was really rooted out of an opportunity for myself and a childhood friend of mine who's also an MD, Dr. Tonya Jones. We decided to start Educated on Purpose a couple of years ago because as high school students, we had no exposure to science at a high level. We had no exposure to medicine at a high level, but yet we both became, for myself, I became a PhD level scientist and he became an MD level physician or clinician. So we wanted to pay it forward and give students an opportunity to be exposed to not just science, not just medicine, but to a variety of careers, a variety of career options that they could potentially pursue in the future. So Educated on Purpose is a play on words. It's rooted in education, but you're educated on your purpose. So what is it that drives you? What is it that makes you wake up in the morning? And we were equipping students with leadership development skills at the high school level, beginning at the 9th grade when students initially enter high school. So we feel that professional development should not be limited to when you're a senior or when you're a junior preparing for college, but these things should come much earlier in the secondary education process. And that's what Educated on Purpose was all about.
Yeah, I think the engagement that people have in the communities when you have one of these avenues or you have a platform to actually do so, I think it's an obligation to most of us. And it's certainly not said, but I mean, many of us feel like when you have something like that, you should be able to actually foster that other people are able to gain something from it. So that's a great initiative. And I would encourage people to actually look into many of these. We'll be sharing some of the some of these through the podcast and sharing some of the different initiatives that you have, because I know that you hold multiple leadership roles in different professional societies. You also do a lot of community outreach, professional development activities. So the second question that I had for you is, what is an important thing that you think people should learn about your process or everyone else's about engaging science within the community and engaging scientific communication as you have done?
So what's really important is that you understand your why, and that you also understand what is it that you want to bring to a community, what value you want to bring, what is going to be your legacy. So we talk about legacy, and legacy is a word that's thrown around a lot. Yeah. But what people don't realize is legacy is innate. So legacy starts with you. It starts with your intention and where you want something to be in the future state. And so it's really a conversation that needs to happen internally with yourself first, and then getting real concrete around how can you manifest that intention that's within you and put that in the world that in a way that can be of service. So when you're thinking about any type of community engagement, really think about that. Think about what the community needs, because you may have something that the community does not need. So let's talk about Educated on Purpose, because I love to use examples. Educated on Purpose was started a couple of years ago, but we're no longer doing it right now. And why is that? Because it ran its course. Our partnering school, which was a high school in the community, it was demolished. It was slated to be renovated. It was slated to be rezoned. And so the school was literally under construction, under reconstruction. The old school was completely demolished and they're building a new school. So everything is going to change in the next year or two. So why I'm saying that is because you have to know also when your value stream has ended, and that's absolutely okay. What you do in turn is you look for other ways, you look for other opportunities to lend your gifts. So when you're thinking about getting in the community, you're thinking about getting of service, whether you're trying to communicate science, whether you're trying to help students understand different careers in science, or even help patients understand their disease process, knowing what you have and how you could deploy that, but also knowing when to fold them, knowing when your time has ended. It makes no sense to keep going down the path if there's no real outcome, if there's no real end goal. So you have to get started, but you also have to know when to stop as well. And knowing what's a good point to say, okay, I need to pivot or I need to move directions. That's also very important.
Yeah, I think that resonates with being realistic and the goals and expectations that you have, and also shifting in some ways. So that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I mean, in general, I think that the engagement that people have with the communities is still pretty low. We have a disconnect between what we actually do in our work life and then our life balance. But in many places, like cities that are like UNC, with Chapel Hill, there was a lot of initiatives within the university and like this different
there was so many
in the city, because those are pretty small cities that are engaged with the university fully, and that's always nice to see. But in other places that are bigger, it's hard to interpret how those relationships can actually become. So let me shift the conversation a little bit, because one of the things that we try to do in the podcast is highlight either scientific or anything that are happening in the community, which in February we're celebrating Black History Month.
Yes.
So with that in mind, and I know that 1 month is not enough to actually celebrate cultures that should be celebrated every time and during the year, but I think it focuses and gives people the opportunity to really focus on what is important for any type of community or culture. So since we're celebrating this, what do you think represents for you personally? And is there a particular way that you celebrate Black History Month?
Yes, it's a great question, and such a timely question too, because Black History Month is very important to me. It's very important to the African American community, the Black community, and all those who feel it's important to be celebrated. It's just, it's a great time where we can reflect on the contributions. We can reflect on the way that Black people in America have really added to the fabric of the American dream. And so I think that's really important that we continue to talk about that. And you're absolutely right. It should not be limited to 1 month, but we should get curious about all cultures as well. But I love the intentional, and we talked about that a couple minutes ago around just being intentional about what you do. So I love the intentional nature about having 1 month dedicated. The way I celebrate Black History Month is through a number of different ways. I'm a big history buff. So one thing that I've done on the science communication front over the years is that I've made it my mission to publish the stories of African American scientists, because that's what resonates with me. And as I progressed through graduate school and as a postdoc fellow, the stories of African American scientists who made it, who were able to earn their PhDs, who were able to publish papers and do science at a really high level during a time in America's history where it was just unheard of and there were huge barriers. That was a huge momentum and motivation for me. So what I started doing a couple of years ago was I started publishing in peer-reviewed journals the journey of these African-American scientists. And that led me to publish a number of papers. Some that I'm really proud of are papers on Ernest Just, who was an early developmental biologist, Percy Julian, who was an early medicinal chemist, as well as Charles Drew, who was a early MD physician, clinician scientist, who pioneered blood banking. And all of these stories are in peer-reviewed journals. They can be easily accessed through Google Scholar, and they live out there in the peer-reviewed journal universe for anyone to read and for anyone to be able to review. So I like to think of that's my legacy. And whenever Black History Month comes back around, I like to remind people, here are the stories of some prominent African-American scientists. But I'm not just stopping with them. I took a little bit of a break, but my goal over the next couple of years is to really begin to discover other stories of other Black scientists and publish their stories as well. One in particular that I've been really interested in is the story of Edward Boucher, who is the first African-American physicist. And he's actually the first African-American to earn a PhD, and he earned his PhD from Yale University. So I'm really interested in his story and working to figure out ways, how can we tell that story with more color? How can we tell that story with more scientific robustness? Really not just talking about the person, but talking about their scientific contribution. So those are some ways that I celebrate Black History Month.
Yeah, that's great. I think in general, like you said, the journey is always like one of the basic things that can guide other people to actually get involved. Like in the community, it's hard to tell people how, or like advise people on how to do something or motivate them other than actually showing them. So that journey in between, it's so reflective. And in that sense, let me ask you, so based on that, is there something from your upbringing, from your journey and your personal background that you have found is reflected or important in your career path so far?
Ooh, you're just hitting me with all of the deep thought questions. So
yeah, I'm gonna have to
let me think about this. This is putting me on the spot, but I would have to say my mother was a huge influence on me very early on. And it wasn't because of anything special that she did, but it was around how she supported me. So I was a really nerdy kid, and I always loved science. And my mother always made me feel like it was okay. She never once said, oh, you shouldn't be reading that science book. You should be playing basketball, or you should be playing football, or doing something like that. She always praised that aspect of me. And even though she didn't really understand what career that would lead me down, she always nurtured my dreams. She always just tried to find a way to keep me engaged. And so she was an early supporter. And what it did for me was turn the light bulb on. It was a spark moment that lives inside of me that lets me know sometimes when you're training a student, whether you're working in a lab, whether you're working at an industry organization, people just want to be accepted. People just want their ideas accepted and they need that support. And sometimes it's not our position to say, oh, you should do this or you should do that. It's really our position to just support it from a selfless perspective. And so that's the single most influence that my mother had on my life, was really teaching me how to be selfless and how to really come to situations and accept them as they are and to anticipate the possibilities. I'm sure she didn't know exactly what would come out of her supporting me, but look at what happened now. Years later, I have a PhD, I have an MBA, and those are great things to have. But at the core, it taught me to do that the same for others.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, in overall, all of these stories again resonate with many people. I mean, for people that are coming from families that are supportive or non-supportive, everyone has like a specific moment that tells you something about your history. Like it might be just something that someone told you, someone who supported you in some different ways. It hits us in different ways or different places, and so those things stick with us altogether. And so in that sense, let me ask you, is there something or a moment that you considered up to this moment a major landmark? Was there something that when you think back, is there something that just pops up?
Oh goodness, here you go again with the on-spot, the on-spot questions. What was a pivotal, and you're referring to science, right?
Overall, I mean, you said that your mother always supported you and always gave you something, but you said like there's something that clicked or something that was like a moment. Was there something that really like caught, like every time that you remember like your career and your moments that where you're like going through it, is there something that sticks?
Yes, what comes to mind immediately is an opportunity in graduate school when I was working on this project, and it was a mitochondrial related project, and it was an idea. It was a random set of experiments I did alongside my PhD advisor, and it was not our area of expertise. It was not an area that we felt we had a robust expertise scientifically to really pursue that as a project for the lab. And so we were going down this route, and we had a coming home moment where we both looked each other in the eye and we said, I don't know if we should pursue this because it's not our background. We're getting some interesting data here, but this is not our background, and we didn't really know what to do. So what we decided to do was, okay, we're going to focus on projects that are native to the lab, but let's still work on this in the background. And I promised my PhD advisor, I will work on projects that are native to the lab, but if it's okay, let me continue working on this because I feel like there's something here. I feel like there's something to be explored. There's an opportunity here. So long story short, I graduated, I published papers related to projects that were native to the lab, but we also ended up publishing papers on this mitochondrial project. So fast forward a couple of years, maybe a year after I graduated with my PhD, I am at the experimental biology meeting, and this was in Chicago, I believe, and my phone keeps ringing. I don't know why my phone keeps ringing, but I finally answer it, and it's the editor-in-chief of the American Journal of Physiology renal section.
You might be curious, but I do remember this moment. I'm sorry.
Yes, you remember that.
I was there with you. So and it's weird that we were remembering the same story because I remember you were running because someone called. And you were running. We were in the same meeting again. We were in the same lab, right? But you were running, and I remember you said the last thing I heard you say was, "My paper was something like it was a paper of the year, if I'm not mistaken."
Yes, that's right. It was paper of the year. So that's right. So that's exactly right. It was paper of the year, and it was on the project that we both were like, "Oh, we're not sure we should do this or not."
Yeah.
But it was one of those moments that, even on my hardest day, I think about that. And it's a reminder to Sometimes you just got to support yourself selflessly and try not to add too much to it. It's hard. It's easier said than done, but that would be one of the most pivotal moments for me.
Yeah, that's so funny that you said that. Like, I was just thinking about it, and I remember that we were in the poster, the exhibitor hall, and that's where you were referring to. So yeah, those moments are great, and it's fantastic that you have so many of those different achievements on your CV. But when you look back to it, it's always nice to see, like, remember that moment, and then you say, I remember what I was doing in that moment, and then I remember this, whatever it comes to. So, I mean, it's great because, I mean, during your time in academia, I see that you got a lot of papers, recognitions, and as such. Academia, as I mentioned, I am still very involved in academic research. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you, because we're talking about the progress, all the field work that you have to do, everything, the journey that takes you there. So it's often says that success in academia is often perceived as a reflective resilience. And in many of the people that have worked really hard to get to this position, it also resonates that, however, resilience also asks us to remain overly tolerant of unpleasant or counterproductive circumstances. How do you cope with balancing, like, a good amount of resilience that you did before and now that you've transitioned out of academia, but in your current position?
Yeah, such a good question. For me, it's around remembering what I've accomplished when things get really hard. It's around remembering the good moments, like we just reflected on Paper of the Year. We reflected on my mother. We reflected on intention. Why am I doing this? What is the outcome? What value can I bring? And then what are the wins? What have I done? And what experiences have I experienced that constitute as being a win? And so that's how I establish my resiliency, and that's also how I sustain it. Because when you're going through things that are really, really hard, that require resiliency, you have to remember where you've come from. You have to remember that as dire as situations can seem sometimes, and sometimes we can be in some really, really difficult and bad situations, they're never as bad as things we've overcome in our lives. And so it's really about setting the level and not making a mountain out of a molehill. By no means am I advocating that you suppress the importance of a situation or that you minimize the severity of a situation, but it's really about placing situations in their rightful context. And that's what I'm all about. It's when you think about resiliency, it's really about just placing situations within the right context, with the understanding that at any point, things can get better, things can continue to get worse. But what's the truth? The truth is that we all have within us components that equipped us to handle anything. And so it's really about reflecting on where we've come from, what we've accomplished in the past, and how we could leverage that, how we can depend on those experiences to get us through the next level. That's how I do it.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think it resonates again with what you shared about your journey and all that. So I understand that it's a process, and many of us are working around that same concept. Now, again, shifting a little bit about this. I mean, I mentioned, and I asked you about your process when you were going through academia, but then now as a scientist, what was the most important thing that guided you to transition from academia to industry?
The most important thing was making sure I never lost the desire to be scientifically sound. So just because you transition into industry by no means stands as a testament that you could waver on the science or that you could take a break on it. There are no breaks. You may not be at the lab bench physically, but you still have to leverage your brain. You still have to think. You have to still be able to write. You still have to be able to communicate your findings. All of that, these things that we're taught within the academic setting, are crucial for your success in industry. And I attribute my success in industry to some of that earlier training, especially at the PhD level, and how my PhD advisor really encouraged me to publish as much as I can. I made it my mission to become a really good scientific writer. I made it my mission to become a really good scientific communicator. How I communicate writtenly, orally, and visually using PowerPoint slides or other mediums. These things are paramount to your success in any industry, whether it's in academia in STEM or it's industry STEM positions. So that's what I anchor on. It's really about being scientifically sound and understanding where you are now scientifically. You have to constantly try to exceed that level and keep learning. It doesn't stop. Right now, in my new position, I'm learning so many new things. And even though I was brought to the company for my scientific expertise, this company has different sets of expertise that I need to learn, and I'm learning those now. So the learning never stops. Really opening yourself up for continuous learning is another way, because you always want to keep growing. You never want to be a stagnant person in life, especially if you're trying to ascend in industry or you're trying to ascend academically. We hear stories all the time about academicians who start off doing research in one area and then they venture off into another area and they become really successful. We hear about companies scientifically being known for one area, but then they spin off and have innovations in another area. So that doesn't stop. That's a continuum.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people are now thinking about those transitions, but you said something very important. Your success in academia guided your success now in industry. And I think most people want to put academia behind them. And I think that, there's many things to say, pros, cons, but I think in overall, you cannot oversee that many of the things that you gained during your academic training were probably fundamental for you to even get an industry position. So there's many sides to it, but I think it has more pros than cons. But many people have are looking into what transition looks like. And during the podcast, we've had other people from industry, academia. So we're always looking to have a good mix of people in between. So thank you for that. Bryan, so the last thing that I'm going to ask you, and is a pretty soft question, if you can. So this will be the last thing. I really appreciated that you were able to come to the podcast, share with us your experience. We would want to highlight you because, again, looking into celebrating Black History Month. And the last thing I wanted to ask you is, can you guide us through, what is your day like? What is a day like look for Bryan Wilson?
What does a day look like for Bryan Wilson? Well, there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on throughout the day, but if I had to answer that question in the context of where I work at Halloran, it's really around helping companies, biotech, pharmaceutical companies, move their innovations forward, enhance their clinical development process, enhance their scientific strategies. We are here to assist companies with their problems, and not really problems, but just questions that they want to answer, different areas that they want to navigate. Halloran has a series of expertise across a number of different areas, ranging from clinical science, clinical development, medical writing, regulatory, navigating the FDA. When you're a new company getting started off, you may not know anything about these processes. And even if you're an established company, you may be moving into a different area, regulatory wise, where you just have no sense of how to navigate these things. And so what Halloran does, we are equipped with some really smart people, and we work together to help companies move their therapeutics forward, to move their innovations forward in a way that really gets into the hands of patients. And so we do that in many different ways. Outside of work, I am a husband and I'm the father of a fur baby. So I have a 2-year-old golden doodle. She's all black golden doodle, and she sort of runs the household. So when I turn off the Halloran light, I turn on being a husband and a dog dad light, and also being a family man. I'm a huge family man as well. So that may encompass me attending my niece's cheerleading match or my nephew's basketball game or attending any type of family function or festival here in New Orleans. So it encompasses work, but it also encompasses family time and play time, because that's what's really important outside of work, is that you're making time in your day for those things that really matter, and that you're nurturing relationships that nurture you. So
that's great. Thank you, Bryan, for being a guest in our show. It was a great interview. And if you have any social media, we'll be sure to put it in here, tag you in them. And hopefully you'll be coming back to the podcast sometime soon.
Anytime. And anyone, if you're out there listening, connect with me on LinkedIn. You can easily find me, Bryan Wilson, Bryan Wilson, PhD, MBA. That's the quickest way to find me. Or you can put in Bryan Wilson, New Orleans, and I'm usually the top person that pops up for New Orleans. So anytime, connect with me with questions around career development, scientific education, scientific communication, or just how do you navigate being a professional in STEM, and how do you navigate careers in general. Feel free to connect anytime. Happy to help.
Thanks. We'll be sure to be looking out for any of your endeavors. Thank you, Bryan.
Thank you, Roberto. Happy to do it. Thanks for inviting me.
Our first article highlight is titled On Being Black in the Ivory Tower, published by Cell Press Leading Edge. Doctors Elisa Armstrong, Jeremy Lomax, Nikki Traylor-Knowles, Asel Sambalauka, and Christina Towers detailed their experiences as Black scientists in academia. Topics ranging from gaslighting, imposter syndrome, stereotyping, and lack of representation still run rampant in academia, and it's up to us to amplify Black voices in STEM, not just during Black History Month, but daily as we push for true diversity. This article is available free online at pubmed.gov. Our next article highlight comes from the American Journal of Pathology, titled Bile from Patients with Primary Sclerosing Cholangitis Contains Mucosal-Associated Invariant T-cell Antigens from the Mellum Lab. Primary sclerosing cholangitis is a rare and slow-progressing chronic liver disease that currently has no cure. Although liver transplantation remains as the main method of treatment, there is high interest in finding therapeutic options for patients suffering from this disease. One of the factors complicating this treatment is the involvement of the gut, immune cells, and microbiome in directing disease progression in the liver. In this article, the Mellum Lab found that bile from patients with primary sclerosing cholangitis contain antigens from the gut microbiome itself, and these molecules can activate liver immune cells. This fascinating discovery will help researchers and clinicians alike find alternative treatment strategies for patients with primary sclerosing cholangitis. This article is available online at the American Journal of Pathology website. Our next article highlight comes from the lab of Dr. Cecilia Yates, recently published in current Pathobiology reports. This article, titled Chemokine-Based Therapeutics for the Treatment of Inflammatory and Fibrotic Convergent Pathways in COVID-19, covers how specific inflammatory signaling molecules can direct complication of COVID-19 infection and be potential targets for COVID-19 long-term treatment. Chemokines are messenger molecules that can communicate with multiple cell types to initiate a response. In the lungs, persistent inflammation from these molecules is regarded as the initiator of lung scar tissue development. In SARS-CoV and SARS-CoV-2 studies, there's a direct upregulation of signaling molecules such as CXCL10, which can overwhelm fibrotic pathologies. This review sheds light on the importance of understanding the efficacy of CXCL10 as a primary therapy or as a combination therapy to antibody treatments in high-risk COVID-19 patients. Check this article out free online at pubmed.gov.
Hi, Daisy.
Hi, Tessa. Thanks for doing 7.3 questions.
Of course.
What's keeping you busy these days?
Oh man, all the PCRs I've been running.
And what's your favorite assay to run?
The MTT cell toxicity assay.
What's your favorite gene?
I lately really love SIRTUIN-1.
And what's your favorite organelle?
The mitochondria, obviously.
What do you like about Boston?
All the people that we've met so far.
What's your favorite pipette?
I like the P1000.
And finally, what conference are you looking forward to?
I'm going to ARVO.
And for the point 3, when is it?
ARVO is going to be in May. I'm super excited.
Thank you, Tessa.
Bye.
Bye.
Hello, Behind Our Science. Today we have a very interesting episode. As you can see from my virtual background, we have an invited guest, one of these 7.3 segments that we've been doing. And today we're highlighting the People of Pathology podcast. So Dennis Strank is the founder and the host for this podcast. Dennis is a pathologist assistant at Wisconsin Diagnostic Laboratories and the creator and host of the People of Pathology podcast. This podcast is something very interesting to us because I listen to the podcast. It reaches almost 100 episodes right now. I think they're in episode 98. They have almost 300 downloads every time. There's over 1,000 followers on Twitter and has built an amazing community trying to highlight the importance of people doing pathology, involved in pathology, and how to highlight this scientific communication within the society. So with this, we're going to do this 7.3 question segment. So welcome, Dennis Strank.
Hi, I'm very honored to be here.
No, we are incredibly excited to do collaborations, and we love to do, importantly, with people that are doing something similar to what we are doing, because you're more in the clinical sense, but we highlight all pathology. So people that do experimental pathology, which is what we normally focus on, but people that do in any sort of aspect, and people that are really engaged. I find it interesting when people are engaged with doing a podcast. It's hard to do a podcast.
Yeah,
so,
it is.
It's not easy, and we found that out like going through like our first months. So yours is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it a one-man show?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, so that's even harder. I have an incredible group that helps me, but I mean, so that's why we're trying to highlight as much as we can whoever's doing all of these efforts. So if you are okay, the mechanism for this is I'm gonna ask you 7 questions, and then the last one is a soft question with 3 options. So it's sort of like mimicking the 73 questions that Vogue has released somehow, but we're doing remotely, safely, COVID safe. So let's start with this one. So the first thing is learning about you. So what was your first and most important motivation to do the podcast? What started you?
It was just the fact that at the time, anyway, it didn't seem like there were any podcasts that highlighted people in pathology and lab medicine, which there were 1 or 2 that I actually didn't know about at the time, but from what I could tell, there weren't any. So part of that was that, and I love the job that I do as a pathologist assistant. I want more people to know about it, but not only my position, all the others in pathology and lab medicine. So I wanted to highlight all of those things too. So that was part of it, was to highlight these professions so that other people could know about them and maybe choose them for themselves. And part of it was just to learn about them for myself. So that was the biggest motivation.
Great. And overall, I mean, there's not a lot of big pathology related podcasts. There are more that have come up from the pandemic as people have spread their wings. But there's some value to being part of like the first podcast out there. And also, I know that you are in the top 3 or top 5 of pathology podcasts out there, isn't it?
Yeah, right. I think I'm number 2.
That's amazing. So yeah, let's go with the second question. So you started the podcast. You have a decent community to again for a scientific related podcast and something that doesn't have we have to be honest, that much funding to actually do the production value that others that are like not in like scientific community. So with that in mind, where do you see the impact of a pathology podcast that mostly benefits the scientific community?
Some of it is I've heard stories from some of the guests that have been on the podcast, and people have contacted them as a result of hearing that particular episode and asking for career advice. How do I do, especially like forensic pathologists, how do I get into that field? What do I have to do? Things like that. And a couple people have contacted me. I know some of the pathologist assistant programs, the students that interview there, they say that they discovered the field because of hearing about it on the People of Pathology podcast. So that's really it's really rewarding for me that I've sort of indirectly had like an influence on career paths of a few people. Okay. So that, and especially now, through the pandemic and lab testing has been such a hot topic. I think it's important to highlight the people that are actually doing this testing. So so there's an impact there too.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of value. One of the things that I love about your podcast is your interviewing style. The way that you address many of these different guests. Again, 98 episodes. We're only on 7 and we're overwhelmed. So where did you get any inspiration for the interviews that you do? Do you watching or hearing anyone in particular?
There's a non-science podcast that I like. It's called The Jordan Harbinger Show, and he's a really good interviewer. I mean, he interviews some scientists, and it's like athletes and just celebrities and things, but the way that he interviews, and he put together on, I don't know if you've heard of, it's called Himalaya. It's like one of those learning apps, but he did a course on there, how to do an interview. So there's that. I've read a couple of books about it. There's like podcast seminars and things like that, but mostly it's just, I do a lot of research about the guest. And, so I like to know their backstory, and then I like to ask them about the backstory. And sometimes I'll ask them things, and they'll say, where have I said that? Where did you get that information from? You know what I mean? I mean, it's all it's out there on the internet. You just have to know how to find it, I guess. Yeah. But that's part of it too. And I like to make the episode a story, kind of a conversation, but a story, kind of a, more or less chronological, but something like that. So, I try to keep it like that way, and I find it's more interesting for me, and I think it's more interesting for the audience. Yeah. Overall, I think it engages in many different ways. So, if you had someone, ideal interviewee, scientific or non-scientific, who would you have on your podcast? I feel like over the 98 episodes, and actually I've recorded the next 2, so I've up to 100 recorded now, and I feel like I've had, as far as scientific, I've had those people on, and there's been some that I thought, from the beginning, like, wouldn't it be great if I had this or that doctor, pathologist, whatever, and I have. Sometimes it takes a little bit of work, but yeah, most people are excited to be interviewed and to tell their own story. So, but that's funny because that changes over time. And as I go on and I connect with other people, then they become the ideal guest. You know what I mean? It changes. Yeah. So, as far as non-scientific, I mean, that's a tough one because there's so many people, but I think, again, I like to have a good story. So maybe somebody like, I don't know, Elon Musk, that might be a good one, for whatever bad press he might get these days, but
yeah, hopefully he's listening, and then you'll get him.
Yeah, or like Tim Ferriss. Have you heard of him? Yeah, he would be a good story too. Yeah. Storytelling
is one of the fortes with people that like to do communication. So, and overall having like a good backstory that relates to people is something that is a good quality for like having a good guest.
Yeah, for sure.
So you have a good community of listeners. For the new people thinking about the possibility of starting their own podcast, what do you think can motivate them to start? What do you think motivated you? Because you mentioned a little bit about not having a lot of podcasts that are similar in pathology, but let's say in other fields. What do you think can motivate people to start one?
I think you have to have something to say. a lot of people, it's really kind of trendy to have a podcast these days, but you'll listen to some of those and they don't really have any sort of, like, there's no meat to their content. It's just them kind of rambling on. So you have got to have something to say. And for me, that's kind of easy because most of what is said is from the guest.
Yeah.
Right. So, but I think if you got a topic that you're really passionate about and you have something to say about it, my best advice for that would be just to start, because that was the hardest part, because you can, I mean, you can drive yourself crazy with, do I have the right microphone? Do I have the right software? Which hosting platform is the best one? I got to make a logo, and you can go over the details of that. And it's just, for me, it was like, okay, I gave myself deadlines for these things. I need this, I want it by this time. And just, something to fill in that space, and then it's done, and just go. Because I knew if I waited forever and didn't make decisions quickly, that I would never do it. And so, and I still do that now to a certain extent.
Yeah, I hesitated for the longest time to actually do so. And I think the first thing is like the first one's going to suck. Probably like the first time that you record is going to suck big time. So
the first 10 might
do it. Well, yeah. I hope that ours, we're getting a little better, but overall you have to start. We recorded more than we actually have put it out there, but it takes a really long time to actually get to the soft spot and say, this is where I feel comfortable. So that's a great advice. So if you could grow your podcast to any potential, so if you can reach any means, what do you envision that would look like?
It's like for me, the podcast isn't kind of the end goal. Like if I could grow the podcast to the point where it, if it already is, like I get opportunities to speak at certain things because people have heard me on the podcast. Other companies have contacted me, what do you think about this or that product or service we're going to offer to pathology, the labs, things like that. But, ultimately it would be like, I would like to establish scholarships like that. I've got, I've interviewed a lot of people from different countries, especially like the UK, some other places in Europe, Brazil, things like that. And they have, training programs similar to what we have here in the US. So it would be like, I'd like to establish scholarships for, a pathologist assistant, a pathologist, a medical laboratory scientist, and some, whatever they've got in, like, say, England or something like that, just to sort of give back to the community, I guess, in a way.
Right.
That would be the ultimate goal, but I'm far from that.
I think you're building a community. You are already establishing that itself, and you already said it. Like many of the things that happen after the episode, like people reaching out to other people and whatnot. Yeah. I mean, it's sort of like an opportunity for people to be open and say, well, we dedicated the space, the person is reachable, reach out. And then that's something that we also want to be able to do for ours. So that's something very, very exciting to hear from other people. So we got into the seventh question, and this one is not related to the podcast, just so that people know a little bit more about Dennis. So what is your favorite activity to do during your free time? I know that the podcast demands a lot of time, editing and all that, but if you're not doing the podcast, you're not at work, where can I find Dennis Tran?
I'll probably be out because I'm a trail runner, so I'd probably be out running on the trails. There's a real nice trail just outside of, I live in Milwaukee, and it's kind of outside of Milwaukee. There's a nice trail called the Ice Age Trail. So I'll be out there on the weekends for sure, getting all, well, I guess these days right now, getting all full of snow, but in the summer, getting muddy. Yeah. And then my wife and I like to do like little adventures from time to time. Most recently, we started doing, we checked out have you heard of these sensory deprivation chambers? They're like you float in like a pool of salt water.
No.
Okay. Well, it's very relaxing and meditative. So we've done that. We take like little spontaneous road trips and stuff like that. So that's something we do too. And there's at like the Performing Arts Center here in Milwaukee, we have the season tickets to the Broadway shows. So we go to see it, musicals and stuff like that. That's really a lot of fun too.
And so last one, the point 3 question is, so what is your favorite streaming app? So you have Netflix, Hulu, HBO Max. Which one do you watch?
I watch all of them, but I would say my favorite is probably Netflix. I think it has the most variety.
And what are you watching right now?
Well, see, now as far as what I'm watching, it would be on. So on Hulu, there's a show called How I Met Your Father, which is kind of a spinoff of How I Met Your Mother, and that just started. So that's pretty good. But then, I'm kind of a sci-fi nerd, I guess, a little bit. I like Star Wars, so I've been watching the Book of Boba Fett on Disney Plus.
Okay. Yeah. So
that kind of stuff.
I think it engages many of our audience. I mean, we all have like this, at least the little nerdy part of us. Behind we all watch most of those. So it was great to have you in the podcast, Dennis. We will be doing hopefully more crossovers with your podcast. Try to engage the communities that we both have, and try to build up on each other, because I think it's a good idea of getting many of the people that are doing these efforts all together. So I thank you for your time, and hopefully we'll have you back on the show sometime soon.
That'd be great. Thank you. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you.